Did you structure your current work in progress correctly? Let's find out. Today, we're breaking down the 3-act structure. Welcome, collective of insanity. I'm the awesome Tim Green. I write in the pen name T Green, and today we are starting a new series on structure. It's not the most exciting topics, but it's one of the most important things that you as a writer need to know. So we're going to cover structure over the next few weeks. Today we will be starting with the most well-known, more, I'd say in some cases, more preferred structure, the 3-act structure. Why is the 3-act structure the most widely known? Well, Greek history tells us that their plays were based on a 3-act structure. So that has become the norm of plays. Even in film, it's 3 acts. Done. Beginning, middle, and end. So a lot of people have taken the 3-act structure and applied it to books. Now, I don't like the 3-act structure. I'm not going to dive into my reasonings behind this. Just know it's just not my favorite structure. But I'm never going to deny that structure is important. Structure is super important for writers to understand. You need to understand how a story flows, how it works together, so you're constantly moving your plot forward and not just doing random crap that just is fluff, which basically becomes the sagging middle. We don't want that. So structure is important. How you structure your novel will be determined by you. And the 3-act structure is one of the easier structures to understand. We're going to break down the 3-act structure and everything you need to know. There are some important terms you need to know. This is an image of all the terms you're going to want to know. These will kind of fall into overall structure and good terms to know going forward. And I will cover all these terms and what they are, where they fall within the 3-act structure. We're going to dive right in, so we're going to start with Act 1. Act 1 is known as the setup for the story. It lasts about a quarter of the actual book in the 3-act structure and contains 3 of the terms I listed earlier, known as exposition, inciting incident, and the first plot point. That seems like a lot of information already. It's going to get technical, so I'm going to try to make this as best I can. You want to give an example of what's going on, how we get to where we're going, and build towards the actual story, which is Act 2, which we'll get to in a few minutes. So let's dive into the actual plot point, the actual terms. Okay, so let's talk about exposition. Exposition is simply we fill in information about the story of the characters and what's going on. I'm actually going to read a definition off the screen in front of me that you cannot see. Narrative exposition is the insertion of important background information within the story. Example of information about setting, characters, backstories, prior plot events, and historical context. That's a lot right there. And while it used to be very common and appropriate to spend a good portion of the first part of the book, of Act 1, giving us a background story, telling us everything about that, you can dive into layers and layers of story, background history, characters, and before we even get any further. That's not common today. So a lot of authors will actually skip exposition and weed that in Act 1 as needed, and they'll jump right to the next term. Okay, so now we're at the exciting incident. What is the exciting incident? Again, I'm going to read the definition to you. Is an episode, plot point, or even the event that hooks readers into the story. This is a particular moment when an event that thrusts the protagonist into the main action of the story. Everyone talks about, like, why should the reader keep reading? Why, when they pick up your book, why should they pick up and read the rest of your 300, 400, 600 page book? This is where it's going to hook them. Because usually in the beginning of the book, readers give about this much shit about your story. and they start reading. But they're going to give you this much space before they say, fuck this. So the hook, or the inciting incident as it's known, is where you want to really capture your reader. I'm going to keep reading. Okay, so a lot of writers, what they'll do is they'll start their book as close to that inciting incident as possible. That way the reader starts the book, and within a few pages, let's move on to the final term of Act 1, the first plot point. The first plot point is an event that changes everything and becomes a personal turning point for the main character. This is where the first act ends and the second act begins. It's usually around the 25% mark. Everything after this is the heart of the story, as I kind of said. So you want to make this a good spot. So basically, you had your inciting incident that captured your reader in, but they're still kind of like doing their own thing. But now we need to get them into the heart. We need to get them moving. That's what the first plot point is. The first plot point is going to be that spot where, like, okay, we have no choice but to run away, fight, whatever, and go forward and move. That should be around the 25% point, and everything after that will be part of Act 2. So let's move on to Act 2. Act 2. Alright, so Act 2 is the longest part of your book. It contains 50% of the entire book. That's a lot. And the reason why it's a lot, it's also because this is the heart of the story. This is where you got to keep your reader interested and make sure things are happening that are pushing the plot forward, but at the same time, not all action. As much as that'd be great, and one of the things that happens here in Act 2 is known as the sagging middle. We'll cover that in a little bit more, but let's go over the terms that are involved in this spot. But let's move on. What happens in Act 2? Act 2. Rising action. What is rising action? This is a term that actually doesn't really have a location in Act 2, because it's all of Act 2. From the first plot point to the climax, your action should be going like this the entire time. Some people will say, no, it can't be like this. It's more like peaks and valleys. You're going more like this, but it's still constantly going in an upward trajectory. So rising action will happen throughout this second act and going into the third act. Now let me read the term and the definition of rising action so you have it. It is a series of irrelevant incidents that create suspense, interest, tension, and a narrative. This happens throughout the act. The first part is where your characters are usually reacting to the antagonist's actions, leading to the midpoint. And the second part, after the midpoint, is where the characters are actually acting instead of reacting. So that's what rising action is. So with that, that's what rising action is. So let's move on to the midpoint. Act 2. Midpoint. The midpoint. The spot where everything goes to shit. Oh, no, literally, I'm talking about for a lot of books, because this is the spot where I said the sagging middle. We're literally in the middle of the book. This is where things go bad, and a lot of people will stop reading if you don't keep their interest. The midpoint is what keeps your second act from dragging. It is what caps the reactions in the first half of the book and sets up the chain of actions that will lead to the characters into the climax. There should be an event at the 50% point of this book that will change things. The characters have to go from reacting to the main character, the main villain, protagonist, antagonist, whatever, into no, we're acting. We're making the calls. We gotta do something to help solve this. It may not be the exact climax, but it's going to now start pointing us. Everything after this point will lead to the characters making choices that will lead to the climax, the final confrontation of the book. We'll get to climax in a minute, but you want conflict here. Something should happen that leads them to moving forward and going towards there. So that's what you want here. Okay, with that said, let's move on to the final term, Act 2. Plot point 2. Generally, the first and second plot points are the two big events that coincide. The first one leads you to the meat of the book. The second one is that will lead you to the climax. What a lot of people will use this is at the very end of Act 2. This will lead into the third act. The point of the story where everything seems to come together for the character is the last tidbit of information that will show him into the battle against the villain in the resolution. So, like I said, things come together. Yes, things come together, but it's also where they got the final piece they needed, and then this will move on. It's something that will lead to the final realization of how to end this all, or how to stop the villain's master plan, how to thwart. Yeah, I'm done. Okay, but that's what this is the point. After this, you are going into after this point, you are in Act 3. So, with that said, let's move on to Act 3. Act 3 has arrived, and this is known as the resolution, about 25% of your book. Now, this is where everything finishes up. We have two terms to go over. The first one is the climax, and the second is the resolution. As you'll see in a few minutes, I butchered the actual term for this, so I'm just referring to it as the resolution. But this is where you wrap it all up. You're going to finally thwart the villain, and then you're going to figure out what happens afterwards. So, with that said, let's move on to Act 3, the climax. So, you finally reached the climax of your novel. So, what is the climax? Let me tell you. This is the part of the story or play where the tension and action reaches its highest point. You know that like upward trajectory, rising action I was talking about? You hit it here. There's no higher point than right here. Everything is on the line. The world's at risk. The lovers must fight to stay together. Whatever your climax is. Or your story action, conflict, and your character's story arc or character growth should also come together. This is where you're going to have your final showdown. You are going to have your protagonist and antagonist finally duke it out. You don't have to have a fist blow, epic confrontation. A lot of people will do that. You want the tension to be resolved. Whatever the overall outcome of the story is, this is where you finalize it. And this is going to have an impact on the rest of the world. Now, not necessarily the rest of the world in general unless you're doing epic stakes, but it's going to be on the world of your protagonist and the cast of characters. We have a cast of characters. So that's what you're going to do. Again, there doesn't have to be action here, but this is a good point where you should have something that really draws that conflict to the absolute apex. Act 3. I'm going to butcher this. The denouement. I'm just going to say resolution. As you saw, I really butchered the name of how to pronounce this. So it was up on screen. So, but this is where everything, you've beat your villain, you return to your normal life, or whatever whatever is going to happen. But this is where you start to come down that graph. Conflict is rapidly falling. There should be no rise in conflict after this point. You can have some disagreements, but it's not like it's like oh my god, we're not at the end of the book. That wasn't the epic that wasn't what happened. No, you can have some conflict, but it should not be spiking back up at all. It should be kind of coming down. So, and this is where you'll show the consequences of what happens in the climax, the villain's plans or whatever's going on, and really just kind of see what's going to happen. A lot of the times movies will skip over this. especially a Michael Bay movie. Just go watch a Transformers. After the climax, it rapidly, he goes like, oh yeah, blah blah blah, blah, and the credits. Which is fine. It's because you want to spend a lot of time in there, and it's just, why should people stay around if you're going to have this lengthy resolution? Unless you can do it well, and Michael Bay has chosen not to. But in your books, this gives you a chance to actually have that resolution and really actually kind of dive into, wow, what just happened? Okay, what's going to happen going forward? Some books will end before you really dive into this. So it's a nice little thing. It's not long, but it's a good kind of wrapping up of the story. So this is where you'll do that part of it, as you're in the 3-act structure. Alright, with that said, let's move on to the exercise. Okay, so for the exercise, what I want you to do is I want you to take your work in progress or new story that you're going to start working on and break it down into the 3-act structure. So go on to whatever program you're going to use or your notebook and write out Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. And then write down exposition, inciting incident, first plot point, rising action, midpoint, second plot point, climax, and resolution in there, in each part of where they fall. And then what I want you to do is, write down as many words as you want. 1 sentence, a paragraph, multiple paragraphs. It's up to you. I would say in 1 or 2 sentences, figure this out, and then expand upon that. That is your exercise. Like I said, you can do it for a new project, or you can do it for your current work in progress, and see how well that matches up with what you're working on. Alright? Okay, well that's all I have for you today. Be sure if you made it to the end of this video, please give me a thumbs up. Why wouldn't you? Because you made it to the end of the video. You clearly must have liked what you've been seeing, so please give me a thumbs up. I do post new videos on Tuesday. If you want to know when new videos go live, subscribe and click that bell and join the collective. I am going to be shooting, actually, I have plotted out a bunch of vlogging videos that are going to dive more deeply into me, my eccentric personality that I like to do in these videos will be probably there, but you'll get to see more about what I'm going through, my writing experience, and more vlogging specifically. But those will be coming up soon. The only way to know when they go live is to join the collective. If you'd like some more information on writing, go over to the 01 podcast group and listen to my podcast with my buddy Adam Daly of the 01 podcast group, The Writer's Mindscape. You can click the link above my head or down in the description to get there. We are world building a brand new world so you can see how we go about it. In the meantime, you can find me on social media. I recommend Instagram, where I'm going to be posting my videos from my writing trips, all spots that have scenes of my upcoming novel, Seeing Through the Veil. That is going to be exclusive content to Instagram. So go find me over there. Also, starting very soon, I will be going to Scribophile, which is an online critique area where you can post your writing, get some feedback on that. I will actually be going, on Sundays, I will be actually going there and critiquing work. So if you'd like me to critique your work in progress, you see my username on the screen. Go over there, find me, send me an email and a link to your posted content, and I'll be more than happy to give you a critique. And I usually get really good feedback from people saying they liked my. Other than that, I hope you all have an amazing writing week, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.